Okay, so today, do 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 do. Oop, hold up. There we go. Sorry, I set up all this last night as I was doing something else, so apparently I've missed some things. What's going on here? Hold on. Check, 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 check. Ooh. Check, 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 check. My microphone seems to be dying. I'm going to switch over to a different one. Check, 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 check. Hey, hey. Okay, great. That looks like that one is. Yep, I got more than a signal going to you now. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so we're going to talk about microphones here. And you might want to take a couple little notes here just to make sure that you kind of keep these things and some of these things in mind. Okay. Okay, so microphones. Microphones belong to a family of things that we call transducers. And I'm going to move the mic. There we go. So microphones belong to a family of things we call transducers. A transducer is anything that gets you from the acoustic world to the electric world, basically. It's converting electricity to sound and vice versa. So a microphone is the input side of a transducer, and as you can probably guess, the speaker is the output side of transducers. So let me back this up just a hair. So there are a couple different versions of how microphones are designed and how they work. So we need to look at those and understand what the pros and cons are to each one. So the first one, and the most the simplest design, is what's called a dynamic microphone. Now, the way this graphic isn't perfect, the way that I like to suggest this is imagine. Do you guys know? You probably know what a stock pot is. It's basically a really deep cooking pot, if that makes sense. Um, so basically, it's the whole point is you put like an entire turkey or chicken in there, and then you cook it until it falls apart and basically becomes like beef broth or chicken broth or whatever. That's what or stock is what it's called, which is why it's called a stock pot. So a stock pot is a really deep pot. That's the important part. Now um, imagine that you have a um, paper plate. Yeah, it needs to be a paper plate or even a styrofoam plate that is larger than the stock pot. Okay, and then imagine you take one of those solo cups that you see at parties and you super glue that to the bottom of the plate, the paper plate or styrofoam plate. So what's happening now is that you have this plate with this cup that is glued to the bottom, and the plate is larger than the stock pot. Now we're going to take this plate and cup thing that we've made, and we're going to put it inside the stock pot. So since the plate is bigger than the stock pot, the edges of the plate hit the edges of the stock pot, and the stock pot holds that plate up, right? This also means that the cup is physically hanging on to the plate, and it's hanging down inside the stock pot. But the key thing here is that the cup is not touching the stock pot in any way, right? It's plenty deep that the cup doesn't touch the bottom. The cup is much smaller than the plate, therefore it doesn't touch the sides. So if I switch back to my graphic, the plate is the diaphragm. The cup is the magnets, and then those thick black bars would be the stock pot that I'm talking about. Okay? Now, the last thing would be the voice coil. Now, the voice coil is equivalent of if I were to take metal wire and run it around the inside of the stock pot. Okay? So that wire is connected to the stock pot. It's connected to the outer wall or the inner wall of the stock pot, but it's not touching, again, it's not touching the cup slash magnet. So the diaphragm is flexible. Just like this is why I suggested a paper plate or a styrofoam plate, because a porcelain plate wouldn't move, but you can push on a paper plate and it will move. The diaphragm is that flexible. So when the diaphragm gets air pressure changes, it moves. And when it moves, the magnet that's connected to it moves. And as anybody that's ever played with magnets will tell you, when a magnet moves in relation to something else that is magnetically charged, there's energy, right? There's repulsion or attraction. So the voice coil is electrically charged, and then you have a magnet in there. As the magnet moves within that voice coil, that coil of copper, a copper wire, then it starts to disrupt the electromagnetic field, and that is basically translated into an electrical signal that goes down the wire and goes into your interface and goes into Pro Tools and gets recorded. Okay, there's a couple more steps in there we haven't talked about, but that's the main gist of the microphone. Now, dynamic microphones have a number of pros and cons, but the thing that I really want to stress is that it is not about better or worse, it's about different. Okay, so this is not better or worse, it's different. So the characteristics here is that it's not affected by heat and humidity. It doesn't provide a very detailed sound. It's cheap and durable. And it's great for live sound and loud sources. So why is it great for live sound and live sources? It's very durable, right? It's not going to fold if you give it too much signal. The other thing about this is it says it does not provide a very detailed sound. That doesn't mean you're missing frequencies per se. Well, you kind of sacrifice a little bit of the super extremes. But when I say it doesn't provide a very detailed sound, it's not so sensitive that if you're on stage, it is not going to... if you're on stage, it is not going to pick up everything else around you quite as much. Which, if you're on stage, is a good thing, right? You don't want to get all that other stuff. So, not affected by heat and humidity because the diaphragm is usually plastic, so it doesn't really care. You can take this microphone to the Arctic Circle. And you can take it to the Sahara Desert, and the microphone will sound the same. The only difference in your recording is that lions are in the back of one and penguins are in the back of the other one. That's the only real difference you're going to have. So I've got a couple examples here. So easily the two most popular that you'll ever come across, and actually I'm going to use my close-up mic here to really get in there. That's this one. Here we go. This is the SM58. You've probably seen this a million times, right? This is an industry standard, especially for live sound. It's a dynamic microphone. It has a built-in windscreen, so that when you speak into it and you have B's and P's and those pops and things, it doesn't, blow out your sound system. These things are just... I've never seen a broken one. Literally, I will give somebody $10 if they can break one. If you've got some time and you're looking for something to Google on the internet, Google SM58 destruction or tour bus. There used to be a video out there, and I can't find it anymore, where somebody took an SM58, they put it on the ground, they ran over it twice with a tour bus, and then the guy went over, picked it up, and used it, and it still worked. People have buried these in their backyard for 6 months and taken them out of the ground, and they still work. They've dropped them from 2 stories up, and they still work. Like, you cannot destroy these things. Great investment, industry standard. You cannot destroy this thing. The other industry standard dynamic microphone is this one, which is the SM57. So the other one was the 58. This is the 57. It's basically the exact same microphone without a windscreen. So the SM57 gets used on... you can use it for vocals. Many people have used it for vocals, but it's really common on snare drum and electric guitar. And I think there's one in the recording studio. There should be one in the recording studio unless it's been moved. You can't go wrong with one of these. It's an industry standard in recording and in live sound, SM57 dynamic mic. Now, there's a couple others. It's not quite as easy to use that close-up mic as I thought, so let me switch over. Okay, there are a couple other. This one is what's called the RE20, the EV RE20. This is kind of an industry standard. A lot of people refer to this as the Howard Stern mic. He used to use one of these. Radio announcers use these all the time. So this is a dynamic mic. These two guys are both kind of equally popular. This is the D112. This is often called the ugly duckling because it kind of looks like a duckbill, maybe. And this one is called the B52. It's the Beta 52 by Shure. These are both industry standard kick drum mics. I can't think of a single live sound venue that I've been to that didn't have one of these two microphones on the kick drum. I honestly can't. They're that popular. It's just a matter of taste which one you like better than the other, but you'll see these all over the place. And again, the school owns one of these. Otterbein owns one of these. Again, I don't know if it's in the recording studio or if it's in the audio closet downstairs, but there should be one of these floating around. So if it's downstairs, I will bring it upstairs so that you guys can take a look at it and play it. If any of you guys have heard of Nine Inch Nails, Trent Reznor actually used this as a vocal mic at one point. So it's got some cool uses. Okay, so that is dynamic microphones. Let's talk about the next type of microphone. Oh, I forgot I had this slide. Anyway, I showed you the real thing. So there you go. All the things I just said. So now let's talk about condenser microphones. So condenser microphones are very different in their design. A microphone's a microphone, right? They all pick up sound, that's the point. So that part of it doesn't change, but the way they were built is much different. So the condenser microphone is not like a cup hanging on a stock pot. A condenser microphone is much more like a trampoline, okay? So what you have going on here is there is no magnet connected to the diaphragm this time. Instead, the diaphragm is a very, very thin piece of plastic that is actually coated with a very, very thin layer of 24 karat gold. Now, it's not enough that, you know, people aren't going to steal your microphones to take them to the pawn shop and melt down the gold. It's like 3 cents worth of gold. It's literally that skinny. But anyway, it's a small layer of 24 karat gold on top of the diaphragm. So what happens here is that instead, you still need to set up a magnetic field, right? So instead of having the magnet and the coil, they have what's called a back plate. So let's think about the trampoline analogy. So I'm going to switch back to the camera for a quick second. So trampoline analogy, you have, if you've ever been on a trampoline, like your friends had it in their backyard, of course the trampoline itself, you know, goes up and down, right? That's no shock there. If you've ever stood on the side of the trampoline waiting your turn and you looked under, most people I know don't move the trampoline to mow the yard. So the grass under the trampoline gets really long, right? So what ends up happening is you have the trampoline here and the ground here. And anytime somebody jumps on the trampoline, you'll see the grass under the trampoline, you know, move in response to the fact that the air pressure is being compressed every time that trampoline goes down. So a condenser mic does something similar. The trampoline itself is the diaphragm, and the grass or the ground is what we call the back plate. So the back plate is electrically charged, so when the diaphragm moves, it disturbs that electromagnetic field again, and it turns it into a signal, and it goes down the wire, etc., etc., etc. So same thing happens, different way to get the process done, but it's still the same end result. So as you can probably guess, the thing about condenser microphones is it's all the opposites of a dynamic microphone. It is affected by heat and humidity, right? Because metal is more likely to stretch and contract. This microphone would sound different at the North Pole and on the Sahara Desert. Uh, it provides a very detailed sound because without that magnet slowing down the diaphragm, the diaphragm can react much faster. Therefore, it's much more sensitive and much more detailed. It is more expensive and fragile because, again, that piece of plastic and that piece of gold that's coating it is insanely thin, so it potentially can be damaged. Um, it does require what's called phantom power, and I believe I sent you to the video for that that's on my YouTube channel. Go watch that when you get a chance. You just know that you need it for a condenser microphone. To get more information about the 48 volt thing, just go watch that video. It's great for recording and more complex sources. It really picks up detail, which is great in the studio, not so great in live sound most of the time. So you'll find, and the lines are blurring to be quite honest, but typically in the studio, you end up using a lot of condenser microphones and only a few dynamic microphones. And in the live realm, when you do a live show, you tend to use a lot of dynamic microphones because they're not as sensitive and not as many condensers. So it just depends on your application. So there are some pretty industry standards here. You have the Neumann U87. These things are not cheap by any stretch of the imagination. And then the Shure SM81. These are both industry standards, and I'm going to jump over to Safari for a quick second. Just to kind of show you what you're looking at. A U87 is on a slow web page, apparently. There you go. U87s are not the cheapest thing on the planet, right? They're very expensive. Honestly, at this point, you're paying for the name. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. The newer ones don't sound as good as the old ones, but the price is still incredibly high because they're such a legendary microphone. But the thing I really want to show you is not necessarily that. What I really want to show you is this. We're going to go to condenser microphones. And we already looked at what the U87 looks like. That kind of looks like a U87. That looks like a U47, which is another Neumann mic. Looks like a U87. Looks like a U47. That's an actual Neumann. Looks kind of like a U87. Looks kind of like a U87. Looks kind of like a U87. You see where I'm going with this? It's such an influential microphone that other companies, as they make them, try to make them look a lot alike. It's very often mimicked. It's very often copied. So that's something to be aware of. Now, there's something else that I want to. Now that as you're seeing these prices fly by and probably it's blowing you away here, I do want to make an important. I do want to make an important statement here. So we're going to look. We're going to Abbey Road, and we're going to go into their website. We're going to go into Studio. Well, it doesn't really matter which one we go into, to be honest. We're going to go into one of the studios. This is the legendary Studio 2. Microphones. This microphone list is the list of all of the microphones that Abbey Road owns. Now, the important thing about the thing I'd like to point out about this is that Abbey Road has been around for almost 100 years. So it bought a lot of these famous microphones when they were new and they were, relatively affordable. Now they're insanely expensive. But you have 414s here. These are the old versions. They're probably worth $1,500, $2K a piece. They've got quite a few of those. C2 VRs, that's a $10,000 microphone. So is that. The R84 is probably a $3,000 or $4,000 microphone. B&K's 4003. These things are $2,000 a pop. Neumann's U47s and U48s. 11, those are $10,000 a piece if you want to buy a new one. Um, so the reason that I'm going through all this, and again, here's another 6,000, 3,000, 28 U87s at $3,000 a pop, right? They've got everything you could possibly imagine. So why am I bringing this up? Because they own 15 SM57s. The reason that I point this out, and I think this is a really crucial point, is that it's real easy to equate the price tag with the usefulness. And that is not true at all. I'm lucky enough to have, if I can, where did I put it? Here it is. So I'm lucky enough to have access to a U87. Okay, this is a Neumann U87. This is my Shure SM57. Now, if I want to mic a snare drum or a guitar, this sounds awesome. This sounds like crap. If I want to mic a vocal, this sounds awesome. This is not so great. It's not about, price is not an indicator of value, is the best way I have to put it. It's the right tool for the job. The only reason that this is a $3,000 microphone is because that's what it costs for them to do all of this weirdness that's inside, all this circuitry and stuff. That's the cost. That's what it takes for them to manufacture it. So this thing, if you open it up, literally has 4 wires and a transformer in it. That's it. That's all that's in this microphone. Having said that, it's an industry standard, right? Even at Abbey Road, where you can literally have any microphone you could ever possibly want, they still have 15 SM57s. Why? Because they're useful. They're insanely useful. They're less than $100 a piece, right? Snare drum, electric guitar. I can't tell you how many records have been done with this because it's in the thousands or the tens of thousands of records that have been done with this. So do not equate cost with quality or cost with value. It just depends. It's just what that tool costs. There are a lot of really expensive microphones I've had a chance to use that have sounded horrible on certain sources. It's just, I mean, it's so, I can't stress it enough. Don't think that just because the something is expensive, it's going to sound good, and vice versa. Okay? So let me go back to this a little bit here. Okay. So there you go. Last thing I should mention here is that the microphone on the right, the SM81, is what's called a pencil condenser for pretty obvious reasons. But if you hear that term, they're just referring to a design that's like that. Okay, the next one I want to talk about is ribbon microphones. Now, ribbon microphones are fairly rare. They are becoming more popular again. But they're a much different way of dealing with things. So, I think everybody probably knows what a bobby pin is. So a bobby pin is one of those pins where it's got a straight thing, and then it comes over, and then the other side is serrated. It's got a jagged edge. So imagine that you took a bobby pin and snapped off the straight part, and it just left you with the corrugated part that's kind of wavy. And pretend you smashed that down to the width of a human hair. And that is the diaphragm on a ribbon microphone. It is incredibly fragile. It is incredibly small. And it's hung, just like the picture shows, between 2 magnets on either side of it. And of course, it's metal, so that when the ribbon moves, the magnet disrupts the electromagnetic field, yada, 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 we have sound again. So there's a couple things about the ribbon microphone to be aware of. The first thing is there is a myth, and you may have heard this one. There is a myth that you can't use phantom power with a microphone or you'll destroy it. That is only true in very specific circumstances. It's only true because a very specific microphone, a very specific model, had a production run that was wired incorrectly, and if you accidentally connected phantom power to it, it would burn up. The ribbon would literally just burn. It would just go disappear into ash. It'd be gone. That microphone has not been made for 75 years. So if you ever see one, you're insanely. I've never seen one. The particular I can't remember the exact model, but I've never actually even seen one, to be honest. So it's an insanely unlikely thing to happen. There's also some other potential reasons that you could damage a ribbon by putting phantom power on it. But basically, the general rule of thumb is if you're using a ribbon, don't turn on the phantom power just to be safe. But at the same time, if you accidentally turn the phantom power on a fairly recent ribbon mic, don't sweat it. You probably didn't do a damn thing to it. So this is a ribbon mic. This is a very common kind of design for a ribbon mic. Okay. Now, you can't really see in there. You won't be able to see in there with the cameras I have available to me. But the ribbon is going this way. It's vertical. One important thing, though, if you ever use or you purchase a ribbon mic, they have to be stored vertically. You cannot store them for a long period of time like this. The diaphragm is so thin that over time, gravity will warp the diaphragm and it will start to affect the sound of your microphone. Now, holding it like this for 90 seconds is not going to do a thing to it, but leaving it stored like this for 3 years is going to do something. So you want them to be stored vertically. Otterbein does not own any ribbon microphones, so you're not going to have any worries about that necessarily. But these are becoming more affordable, and they're a really cool sound. What they're good for, they're kind of halfway between a dynamic microphone and a condenser. So what happens is that the extreme frequencies, the super highs and the super lows, this does not get those very well. And it kind of rolls them off like a dynamic mic does. However, the frequency range that's left in the mid-range is incredibly even and natural sounding like a condenser. So it's kind of halfway between the two if you want to think of it that way. Another thing that's really interesting about this is that the way this one is designed, this side is bright and the other side is dark. It's what's called an asymmetrical ribbon. What happens on the front singing into the front of the microphone sounds different than singing into the back of the microphone. It's a really cool design. When I get a chance, I'll actually plug this in and see if you can hear the difference here in a minute. There's also actually there's a little bit more discussion about ribbons in the Phantom Power video that I talked about Tuesday. So make sure you check that video out. New ribbon microphones, there's a lot of new ones that are great. If you find something that's really big and old, my suggestion to you is to put it on eBay and sell it because it's fragile. And honestly, until you've gotten a lot of experience in the studio, you probably aren't using it to its full potential. If I found an old ribbon, I would put it on eBay and get as much money as I could and then use that money to buy other gear that is less fragile, more useful, and more modern. So that's my suggestion if you ever come across an old one floating around somewhere. The old ones are great, but they're really fragile because they're just old. They're only good on... Ribbons are great on brass, like trumpets, trombones, that kind of stuff. Ribbons are great on guitar cabinets, actually, alongside an SM57. An SM57 coupled with a ribbon microphone is the sound of guitar, really. I would bet money that 90% of rock and country records are done with that combination of a 57 and a ribbon. Like, it's all the time. Every time I get the chance to do it, that's what I do, and you cannot go wrong with it. I've got some sessions I'll give you where you can listen to, because they're just different enough. They complement each other, but they're also useful. They're completely useful separate as well. So it's a really cool sound. But in general, you probably won't deal with ribbons very much. So I've probably spent more time than they deserve just now. Okay, some other designs. So carbon mics are basically the microphones that were in old telephones, and they're very distorted and dirty sounding. Um, if you ever watch a movie and you kind of hear that kind of like your hand over your mouth, kind of muffled, gritty kind of sound, that's a carbon mic a lot of times. PZM means pressure zone microphone. It's actually a very, very small crystal that is under the tip of that, on the right where you see the PZM. It's under the tip of that, and it's a very small crystal that when it gets vibrated, it actually creates an electromagnetic field, and it goes down the wire and yada yada yada. I've said that a million times already. So PZMs are very natural sounding, but the problem is that they pick up in all directions all the time. So their applications are kind of limited. We'll talk about some specific applications that they are good for. Okay, so when it comes to notes, this is the point at which you draw a big line through your notes, because we have just talked about microphone construction, how they are built. Okay? We are done talking about how microphones are built and how they're designed. Now we're going to talk about something else that's called polar patterns, and this is how they behave. And these two things are not directly related. So that's why I'm like, put a line there. You're talking about a different topic. We're still talking about microphones, but we're talking about a different topic now. Okay, so a polar pattern tells us how a microphone picks up sound. So, like it says, how to read. Imagine that the microphone is in the middle, pointing straight up, and then the microphone, you're looking at it from above, and in this circle, the closer the black line gets to the outside of the circle, the more sensitive the microphone is. In other words, if I stand in front of this microphone, I will come across the loudest if I am directly at the top of this graph or directly in front of the microphone. As I go around to the back side, the microphone picks up less sound, and I will be quieter if I go to the back side of this diagram. Okay? So that'll make sense as we move forward here. So the one that you're looking at now is called a cardioid, but we're going to start with this other one here. The first one and the simplest one to talk about is called an omnidirectional pattern. Omnidirectional means that it picks up in every direction equally all the time. Doesn't matter if you stand in front of it, behind it, anywhere, you should sound the same coming from any direction. This is the only polar pattern that has accurate bass response. Okay? It is the only type of polar pattern that will accurately capture low frequencies. Okay? So if you really want... So I have a set of omnidirectional microphones, and a lot of times what I'll do is I will bring them if I am recording an audition, right? If I've got a tuba player or a bass player that is trying to audition for college, I'll bring an omnidirectional microphone because it will present them in the best light. It will present them in a truthful light, and it will really give the people watching the video an idea of the tone of that instrument because it's very natural. It's a very accurate type of pattern. So you, like, again, very natural sounding, and it picks up everything. That can be a good thing or a bad thing. If you are playing classical music in Riley and you put an omnidirectional mic in front of you, you get the instrument and you also get the sound of Riley. Like it or not, you will get the room sound big time. If I put, let's say I put an omnidirectional microphone 2 feet in front of a singer. Right now, that wouldn't be something I necessarily want to do, but, well, I put the microphone there. I just wouldn't stand there. Let's say I put a microphone 2 feet in front of a singer, an omnidirectional microphone 2 feet in front of a singer, and then I listen to the recording. That recording would probably be 65-70% singer and 30 to 35% reverb. You would get a lot of the room. Okay? So now the next one is the one that you've seen before, and this is actually the most popular. If you go to look for microphones, 85% of them are cardioid. Like, it's the most practical pattern for you to use. It rejects sound from the rear, and it's the most accurate on axis. So I said earlier, with the omnidirectional microphones, you would get 70% Singer and 30% Riley. With a cardioid microphone, you'll get more like 95% Singer and 5% Riley. Maybe 10%. Maybe. It's really a lot more directional. It rejects all the sound from the room. It really picks up just what's right in front of it. I would say more like the 95% Singer, 5% Riley thing is probably closer to the truth. Okay? The downside to this microphone is something called the proximity effect. And I'm going to show you guys an example of that here in a little bit. But the proximity effect says that depending on where you are in relation to the microphone, it inaccurately reproduces the bass. The proximity effect means that if you get really close to a microphone, your voice gets really boomy. That's where you get that radio announcer voice. You get that Howard Stern, that really deep radio announcer voice. It's because they get really close to the microphone and they use the proximity effect. Conversely, if you go too far away from the microphone, the low end drops off unnaturally. So if I tried to use a cardioid microphone to record a tuba player or an upright bass player, and I set the microphone 10 feet away, that bass is going to sound really thin because the proximity effect has gone the other way. It's actually become less sensitive to the low frequencies, and I'm getting less low frequencies. So that's obviously not what, I shouldn't say it's not what you want, but it is something to be aware of. Sometimes maybe it is okay. If you have a very bassy source, sometimes the proximity effect can actually alleviate that. Anyway, so probably the most popular one, the SM58 that I showed you, cardioid. The SM57, cardioid. The U87, it can actually do a couple of them, but most people use it as cardioid. You guessed it. Cardioid is just going to be the most practical thing that you deal with. Most of our microphones at school are cardioids. I can think of only one exception, and I will talk about those later. The next one will be supercardioid. It's got a wider sweet spot. There's two nulls. Usually it's a condenser microphone. Oh, sorry, I need to take a step back here. I apologize. Omnidirectional microphones are almost always condensers. Okay? Omnidirectional microphones are almost always condensers. Cardioid microphones can be condensers or dynamics. Can be either one. Okay? There is one exception to the Omni thing. There has only been one omnidirectional dynamic mic I've ever known about. The reason that there's only been one is that they designed it and it sounded like crap and nobody bought it. So there's one exception to that rule, but it was such a piece of crap that no one's bothered to make another one since. So you can pretty much say that all condensers are omnidirectional. Cardioid, condensers, and dynamics. You're going to see both of those. Supercardioid, this can be a condenser or a dynamic, but it's 90% of the time it's going to be a condenser. It's almost always going to be a condenser. I've seen dynamics that are hypercardioid, but again, they're not very common. It's usually condensers. Now, this is like you can see, it looks like a cardioid, but it's got a little bump in the back. So what's this good for? Well, the reason that it actually is good is kind of in a very specific situation, and that specific situation is, let's say I'm a singer in a bar band. So I hold my microphone here, and I have one monitor directly in front of me, right? That's typical. This is cardioid. It rejects from the back. Great. This is the perfect mic for the job. Now, my band gets popular, and we start playing bigger arenas. What happens? They put a mic in front of me, and what do I get now because we're a famous band? I get two monitors, right? I get a left and right monitor for the lead vocal. The problem is that the microphone is rejecting directly in front of it, but I've got sound coming from the sides now. If I give that vocalist a supercardioid microphone, I've now rejected both of those monitor speakers on stage. So in that situation, it's great because it rejects where the sound is coming at that I don't want. So again, right tool for the job. So not super popular, but when it's important, it really helps a lot. The next one would be figure eights. Now, figure eights is a really interesting one. It's not quite an omni. It's literally they say that mathematically it is halfway between a cardioid and an omni, basically. So as you can see, it picks up really well directly in front and directly behind, but it doesn't pick up at all left to right. Or I shouldn't say left to right, side to side. Okay? Almost all ribbon microphones are figure eight. 95% of ribbon microphones, actually 98% of ribbon microphones are figure eight. Okay? It's just inherent to the design. Only within the last 5 years have there been ribbon microphones that are cardioid. It's a very, very recent developments, and it's a very, very new technique. And I think there's only 1 or 2 microphones that are cardioid ribbons. And all they're really doing is they're taking the figure eight and they're canceling out the backside of it by putting a piece of plastic over it or in the design or something. I don't know exactly what they're doing, but but if you pick up a ribbon and you know it's a ribbon, you can pretty much bet the bank that it's going to be figure eight unless it's a very specific kind of ribbon. Condensers can do this too. The 414 and the U87 can do it, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. This can be really useful. So many years ago, some of you will have seen, I don't know if you guys have seen it, in Riley, the front edge of Riley has these panels that come up, and there's an orchestra pit down there. So many years ago, we had the person that preceded Dr. Davenport. I was working with him. He wrote a musical called Napoleon, which is obviously about Napoleon Bonaparte. And he was basically doing a workshop performance of it because I think he was trying to basically sell it to the West End, which is, London's version of Broadway. Big cast, big orchestra. That place was packed. That orchestra pit you couldn't wiggle your eyelashes without hitting somebody else. It was just jam packed down in there. But being a musical, I had a couple issues. He wanted me to record it because he needed a demo to shop the show, of course. So I needed to do an audio recording, but there was nowhere to put any microphones, pretty much. I was really limited as to what I could do. So what I ended up doing is I ended up using, let me not use the one that I'm actually talking into. So I used this, which is the AKG 414. Which can also do phantom power. I'm sorry, phantom power, geez. It does need phantom power, but it can also do figure eight. So what I did was, instead of the microphone facing this direction, I turned it sideways, and I set it to figure eight. So by turning it to figure eight, it picks up directly from the left and the right. So what I did was, the problem I had was that the lead violins were directly in the middle, and they were literally so close together that their music stands were like this. They were physically touching. And I had the conductor 1.5 feet away from them, frantically waving his arms and flipping pages. And then I had a singer on stage, on the front edge of the stage, singing at full voice. So I'm trying to get these 2 quiet string instruments, but I don't want the voice on stage, and I don't want the conductor that's standing there breathing heavy and flipping pages. So what did I do? I took my 414 that I had at the time, and I made it figure eight, and I put it in the middle between those 2 violins. I was able to wiggle it in between those 2 violins, and it picked up this violin, and it picked up this violin, but it rejected the singer on stage, and it rejected the conductor, right? It's all about right tool for the job. So when you're thinking about what you want to do, you want to think about how the microphone reacts and where you can place it so that it works. There's some other weird ones that you might hear about. Hypercardioid, wide cardioid, subcardioid. They're just like halfway points. A subcardioid is an omni that's starting to become directional. A hypercardioid is a supercardioid that's trying to become a little bit more cardio. It's just halfway points. Honestly, I never use these, but you will see them advertised and mentioned sometimes. So the AKG 414, which I just showed you a second ago, and which I'm speaking through right now, has the ability to actually change its polar pattern. So as you can see in this graphic, it's omni, that's what's called wide cardioid, and then it's cardioid in the middle, and then it's supercardioid, and then it's figure eight. And the cool thing is that I can actually stop halfway between any two of those pair. So I can stop halfway between the omni and the wide cardioid and get the subcardioid, the one that's just kind of directional. I can stop halfway between supercardioid and figure eight, and I can get a figure eight that's not quite as sensitive on the back. So it's really interesting to be able to play with that sometimes. This is one of the few microphones I know that can do that, but that's basically what you're looking at. So let me actually show you guys what it is that you're hearing. Okay, so I've got this 414. I'm going to try to hold it roughly the same place in front of me here. And it is in cardioid mode right now. So as I'm talking, I'm going to spin it around. Okay, cardioid, 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 cardioid. Now, as I can tell by the meters, and I'm sure you heard, I got quieter as I spun it all the way around. Right? That's a cardioid mic. You spin it back around because the cable's going to get twisted here. So now I was in cardioid mode. I spun it around, and you didn't hear me. Well, you kind of heard me because the sound is bouncing off. There's a TV in front of me. The sound is bouncing off the TV and getting back in the mic. So you heard a little bit of me, but the level drops significantly because it's rejecting things from the back. Now I'm going to change this. Now it is in omni mode. So you've probably already noticed that the tone has changed. I'm hoping you're noticing that the tone has changed. There's probably a little bit more low end. The AC is very quiet in this room, so in normal rooms you'd probably start hearing the air conditioning, but so there's probably more low end in my voice. And now I'm going to spin this one around. And as I spin the omnidirectional mic around, you're probably going to notice that my voice isn't really changing because it's omnidirectional. It picks up from every direction equally, right? So omnidirectional is a natural sound, extended low end, and it picks up from every direction. So that's the easy thing. So now I'm going to switch all the way over to figure eight. Okay, so I am all the way over at the figure eight setting. Now I'm in the front here, and I'm going to try to go kind of slow, but you're going to notice that I'm going to disappear quickly on the side, but then I'm going to come back when I spin it around. Okay, so I'm talking. This should be the least of me, and I'm talking, and I came back pretty quickly. Now I'm talking into the back of the microphone. I should sound the same as I did on the front of the microphone. I'm just talking into the back. So I'm going to go spin back around, talking on the side, talking back in the middle. So that gives you an idea of how much polar patterns make a difference in microphones. It really, you really want to be aware of it because you want to point the microphone in the right direction is basically what it comes down to, right? You want to make sure that it's actually, you're picking up the things that you actually want to pick up. That's the whole point of using a microphone. Okay, so with that, I am going to finally take a breath and switch back over to the chat so you guys can ask some questions. Okay, so I am back on the stream, and I want to talk about two things real quick that you probably won't deal with very much in recording, but you will deal with it if you are working in live sound or in video. This is another thing that, oops, hold on. I just realized that I left the mic in figure 8, and it was probably, might have been sounding weird. Might have been sounding okay, I don't know. But anyway, so I'm back in cardioid. Okay, so there we go. So we're going to talk about a shotgun microphone. Now, this is a very specific, I've never heard a general consensus about what to actually call the pattern, but it's a pattern that happens with shotgun microphones. So everybody refers to it as the shotgun pattern, basically. And it's exactly what you see there. It picks up very well in front, very well behind, and very well directly to the sides, but it really rejects a lot of things around it. It's used in broadcast, and it is used a crap ton in film, in videography. Those little camera-mounted, when you see the camera-mounted microphones, as a matter of fact, the microphone that I was trying to use here a little bit earlier that seems to be acting up, right there, that is a shotgun microphone. And it actually is supposed to go on the front of a camera, right? And then it gives you the ability to just pick up your subject and not have to worry about picking up a bunch of other things that you don't necessarily want. So that's that would be that. Okay. Okay, and perfect timing. The last thing I want to talk about, promise this is the last thing I'm talking about. This is not microphones, but whoops, sorry. Didn't mean to leave you staring at the ceiling, sorry. The last thing I want to talk about, this is not microphones, but it's about inputs, right? If you're going to record a band, you're going to use microphones, and you're probably going to use these, okay? This is what's called a direct box, okay? And if you've seen one of these guys, I'm sure you've probably seen one of these guys. They have a microphone jack on the back side of them, okay? And then they have 1/4-inch connections on the front side of them. So basically, this is what you would plug a keyboard, electric bass, sometimes electric guitar, even iPod, drum pad, all those kind of things get plugged in here. And they basically get plugged in here. And from an electrical standpoint, what a direct box does is it makes everything look like a microphone from an electrical standpoint, right? Because on a mixing board, you usually, I've never seen a mixing board with guitar inputs on it. That just doesn't make any sense. A mixing board wants to see nothing but microphones. So what a direct box does is it turns your instrument into a microphone from an electrical standpoint. That's all it's doing. There's only really one rule you need to remember with the direct boxes. There's what's called passive direct boxes, and there's what's called active direct boxes. Okay? An active direct box needs phantom power because it's actually powered. How do you decide which one to use? Here's the answer. If the guitar has a battery in it, you use the DI that doesn't have a battery in it. If the guitar doesn't have a battery in it, you use the DI that does have a battery in it. Okay? That's the general rule of thumb. If you have an active DI and a passive DI, you use the active DI when the instrument is passive, and you use the passive DI when the instrument is active. Literally, it comes down to, do you have a 9-volt battery in your guitar? Yes. Okay, passive DI. Do you have a 9-volt battery in your guitar? No. Great. Active DI with a 9-volt battery in it. Now, Otterbein only owns passive DIs. The nice thing about a passive DI is that it will take either type of instruments. So honestly, you can get these and nothing but these and never have a problem for the rest of your career. You'd be totally fine. These sound a little bit nicer if you invest in one, and you can put a passive instrument in here and it just livens it up just a little bit. So is it a night and day difference? Not really. It's a slight improvement. So we don't have one at Otterbein because you don't really need one. The passive DI can take anything. Ideally, it's good for active stuff, and you would put the passive stuff to an active one, but really you can do everything through this one. And the ones we have at school are passive. So the reason I bring that up, though, is that if you have an active DI with a battery in it, and you plug an active guitar bass into it that has a battery in it, you can overload this. You won't damage it, but you'll get a lot of distortion and a lot of clipping, and it won't sound good, which honestly is probably why a lot of people don't bother with these, because you can never get yourself, you'll never have a problem with this. You might have a problem with this if you mismatch the instrument to the DI. So for all of that stuff all that babbling I just did, just remember, get a DI to plug your bass and keyboard into. It turns it into a microphone. You can plug anything into it, knock yourself out, go to town. If you get adapters, you can plug in your phone, your computer, your laptop, literally any DVD players, anything that has a line output, you can plug into this, pretty much. Okay, that should be it for your input stuff. Everybody knows what project we're doing for this weekend, so I'm going to call it a day with that. I'm going to switch back to the group chat in case you have a question, but that should be it for material.